Greetings, family. How's everybody doing on this Monday evening? I hope you all are doing well. I'm excited because we're about to have a wonderful conversation tonight around the life, the totality of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I got my crew with me, which is always wonderful. And then we're bringing on some guests as well. Some phenomenal guests, some who are familiar and some who you guys have not seen with us before, but I guarantee you it's going to be a wonderful conversation. To the left of me or the right of me, however that works for you guys, tuned in. We have our young Howard University freshman, legal communications major. He does not like when I talk about his youth, although he is definitely an old soul in age and a lot of the things. I mean, in his knowledge and how he carries himself. But he's 18 years young, and he just wrapped up his show, 2050 and Beyond. So that is our Jameer Starks. How are you doing, Jameer?
I'm doing great, Miss Star. I'm doing great. Just happy to be back on the screen and able to, exalt and shed a little bit of insight on Baba King. And happy to be here with everyone. Glad to be back on screen with Mr. Jordan too. You just It
Yes.
feels like the influencer days again.
Right. It's like a great reunion that we're having here. So yes, below us we have Mr. Rodney Jordan. So you guys know who he is. I don't know if I need to introduce Rodney. He's been both he and I have been on hiatus for a minute, but we are coming back for the virtual village show, which will be starting again on February 1st. But how are you doing, Rodney? What's going on, Mr.
I'm
Jordan?
doing well. Happy New Year for one thing. It seems like I'm not even sure if I've seen you. I know I've spoken to you, but I don't know if I've seen you in 2021. So Happy New Year to both of you, and congratulations to Jamir for his wonderful programming and the work that he's been doing and finishing that first virtual semester. And so I'm just very much enthusiastic about being with you all tonight and with your special guests that you have coming up on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday.
Yeah. Happy New Year to you as well. And again, Rodney is a familiar face around these parts, and we're getting ready to do our thing again. And Jameer, yes, I'll piggyback on that. Congratulations to that virtual semester that you completed. You guys have been so resilient with all of these things that are going on with you in regards to school and these various changes, but y'all are knocking it out. And they're actually getting ready to start school, start the second semester, right? Tomorrow?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Tomorrow at
tomorrow.
8 a.m. sharp for me.
Woo. I remember those days. Well, look, we are here to have a discussion about Dr. King, and something that's interesting to me, before we really dive into this conversation, because we're going to get all up in there, because, I find that when it comes to Dr. King, people are, to me, they have a strong opinion. They either strongly agree and love him, or they strongly disagree with him. And then, of course, we have the whole issue with the whitewashing, the revisionist history, the deification of him, and really not giving the totality of this man, his work, his life, and all that entailed and encompassed. But I know that, in my opinion, and I have not been on social media as much today, and I'm, on there less and less. But I did not see a lot of posts about him on Friday or on today, because Friday was the actual birthday. And today is the holiday observation. And usually there are like so many posts, different types of posts about him. And I didn't see that really going through my timeline so much. I thought I saw a lot of other things. What about the two of you? Did y'all catch a lot of that, or is it just me?
So I didn't do a lot of social media today. I personally posted a couple of excerpts from Dr. King, both on social media. I spent much of the morning actually reading part of his book, Strength to Love. And then I also was watching, I watched the MLK FBI documentary today. So usually on King Day, I'm probably less on social media and more just trying to, study or being in tune with his message around nonviolent social change and the importance of the spirit which drove him and drove others to bring about the change that we benefit from, whether we appreciate it or not.
How about you, Jamir?
I have been on social media quite frequently, and I've seen like a lot of people have been posting about Dr. King on Twitter, which is where I am most of the time, and it's been a lot of just like sort of deep cut resources, a lot of excerpts from books and like actual speeches of his, as well as just like colored photos of Dr. King. Like there was like photos of him and his wife Miss Coretta in like Jamaica, just sort of like relaxing, which is usually something we don't see often when we vision Dr. King. And it was just all of it was in color, which was refreshing as well. So like a lot of great things relating to Dr. King, just like working to sort of humanize and ground him, while also pushing forward his message of radical change in terms of America, but radical change with the message of love behind it. So
I think the pandemic also has had an impact because normally on a day like this you would get all of the breakfasts and
yeah,
church events and ceremonial marches and all those types of things. Then they would make the local news, and people would play that over. I know some of those events went virtual, but I do think the pandemic and people not being out and about has had some impact on the coverage. But ESPN, I forgot to mention, I was watching some of ESPN today, and so they had athletes drawing the connection between Dr. King and the Black Lives Matter movement and the social justice movements that many athletes are involved in. So I did see some of that, but again, most of that was off of cable television versus social media, at least from what I saw.
So did you find that they're doing his legacy justice, or was it cringeworthy?
I think we could get more into that. I don't think many of us do him justice. Never mind mass media. So personally, I think there's still a very deep misunderstanding or maybe lack of appreciation, as I said earlier, for uh, um, the spirit that drove him and where the concept of nonviolent social change comes from, and his work around a beloved community. So I've always felt that, like I can so often, that figures like Dr. King over time become, I don't want to say cartoonish, but as you mentioned earlier, Ms. Starr, I don't think the full depth and breadth of the fact that, one, we're talking about a human being, but a human being and many human beings who were side by side with him, really driving a movement around psychological and spiritual warfare, as well as just dealing with the realities of the day as they were breaking down the barriers of Jim Crow and institutional racism, and truly fighting the most powerful government in the world. So I think today there's this perception that everybody loved Dr. King. When he died, Gallup polls showed that he was among the most hated in the
yeah,
country. And people forget that the government tried to destroy him. The FBI tried, was bugging him, and there's a reason that he was assassinated. So he's not this beloved figure that people like to deal with today, in my opinion.
Exactly. And right there where you said there was a reason why he was assassinated. So we have this holiday in which we celebrate his life. And I think we all agree that there's been like you said, a sanitization, a deification, a revisionist history outlook on this man and his legacy. And it skirts right past the fact that he got assassinated. And then if they do talk about why he got assassinated, it usually goes into the realm of because he stood for love and he, and I'm not negating that, but we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of this, okay? The timeline of this life and why he was actually murdered, why he was assassinated, and why this conversation is important for us to have. So, as we go through this, this is going to be an intergenerational conversation. And let me say this though. We're giving away books tonight. So it would behoove you to join us and stay active throughout this because we're going to have some questions coming up. And I'll flash these things a little bit throughout the night. Of course, this was on GP. Just got to do this education of the Negro and Black History Month is upon us, but there's never not a good time for that. And then we have Why We Can't Wait. We also have Where Do We Go From Here, which I don't have that physical book in front of me. And then we have The Radical King. So we are going to give those away. We're going to ask some questions throughout the show. And whomever is able to answer those questions first, we will contact with the correct answer. We will contact you. And let me tell you this. Some of you guys are watching on our Clever Communities in Action Facebook page. Some of you are watching on Clever Communities in Action YouTube. And some of you are watching on my personal page and on clevercommunities.org. So though it may appear that you are first, we have all the comments in order that we're able to see. So I don't want anybody to feel slighted. I just had to throw that out there, okay? Because we're going first out of all. We see all the comments coming from each platform right here. So please don't get upset with us, okay? We are going to do that fair and square, and towards the end, we will come back. Even if you answer the question in the middle, we're going to come back at the end and, figure out, we'll let you guys know who the winners are. But to what you were saying, what I was saying before is this is an intergenerational conversation. We have two young people who, again, are 18 years old, college, university freshmen, and then everybody else is above, in 30s and above in this conversation. And so I think it's very important for us to have these intergenerational talks here because what our young people have to say is valuable. And as we get on up there in age and we have experience, that is important too. And both sides need to listen to one another and help and get this work done. There are refreshing perspectives from each side. So we are going to bring on, we have again, Mr. Jordan is coming from the perspective of being a Norfolk Public School Board member, also a member of the Virginia School Board Association, former president, working to dismantle institutional racism. And so he's coming from an education perspective. You guys know I'm the founder and executive director of Clever Communities in Action. We are actually about to bring on a real life MLK-ologist, is what I like to call him, as well as another student. So we're going to have a word from our sponsors right now. And then after we have this word from our sponsors, we're going to get into this conversation. All right.
Buying or selling a home doesn't have to be difficult. At the James Allen Group, we work tirelessly to get families into homes and to get our listings sold quickly at the best price. James Allen, our principal broker, has over 30 years of experience as a realtor. As a U.S. Navy veteran, his knowledge of Hampton Roads and its community is a vital tool in meeting the home buying needs of military families. If you're ready to buy or sell your home, contact the James Allen Group at 757-449-8322. Sign up today for our free home buyer or seller seminar at jamesallengroup.com.
All right, so let's bring on our guests now. Let's bring them up here. All right, and where's our other? Let's bring our other guest on up here as well. All right, so we have a familiar face down here, and that is Mr. Joseph Sturgeon. And if you guys have been tuning in to 2050 and Beyond Jameer Show, then you saw Joseph twice a week as co-host on the show. And he did a wonderful job there. He is also a freshman at Howard University, and he is a history major, considering going into law or being a professor. So we're really excited about that, and he knows his history. And then also we have Dr. Lerone Wilder, who I want to make sure that I do justice to all of the things that Dr. Wilder is doing. So he is a pastor of the historic Mattoon Presbyterian Church in Greenville, South Carolina, and he is a professor at the University of South Carolina Upstate and Kaplan and Union Institute. And he is also a scholar in ethical and creative leadership in Martin Luther King studies and educational leadership. Okay. So this, we all are hailing with different interests, different backgrounds that also converge here. And again, this is an intergenerational panel that we have, and we are going to dive into this conversation about Dr. King. Now, let me see. I want to start with Dr. Wilder here. And I want to ask you just simply, I mean, this is a pretty broad question, but why do you believe that this conversation is important for us to have? I mean, King happens every year, the holiday, and as Rodney stated, we get the breakfast and we get the different things that happen each year in regards to the marches, and that didn't really get to go the way that it usually does, but this is something that goes down every year. So why is it important for us to have this particular conversation?
I just want to say, Star, thank you for the invitation to join this wonderful panel tonight. I'm humbled to be here, and I'm humbled to share, answer the question that you've asked. I think it's simply because there are things that we don't know about Dr. King. One of the things that disturbed me this morning, and I hear it often whenever we embark on the King holiday weekend, is that he's labeled as an icon. It's troubling to me because this was the same Dr. King who, and of course, Mr. Rodney had already laid it out there. He was one who was hated, one who was led by God to speak truth to power, one who sought to not only focus on civil rights, but also human rights. And to understand that, that Dr. King's life was not just a life that he had lived in a selfish way, but it was a life that he gave of himself. For some may say at the expense of his family, because he even admitted that there were times where there were only certain times of the year he was able to spend time with his family. And even to the point too, where exactly 1 year before he was killed, on April 4th, 1967, when he gave his A Time to Break Silence speech, which was the speech delivered at the Riverside Church in New York City, where he spoke out against the war in Vietnam. It was there that after he spoke, he lost friends, he lost allies, and he sunk into depression from then until possibly his assassination. I say all that to say, and this was my experience when I first decided that I want to study the life and ministry of Dr. King at a deeper level, was because there had to be a lot more about Dr. King than what we were shown every year. And another thing too, I think that we do his legacy an injustice when we only focus on the third Monday of January, as opposed to April 4th. Now, I'm sure everyone in this panel and even the audience tonight will have to help me, because April 4th this year falls on First Sunday. And that's the same Sunday that we celebrate Resurrection Sunday in our churches. So how do we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus while wrestle with King's assassination? It's a very complex one. And again, I'm looking forward to what will unfold tonight. But just to say that there's a lot that we don't know about Dr. King. And if we just unpack what we already know about Dr. King and go deeper as to what we don't know and what that means for us. And even also, as I had learned years ago, to think about the unintended consequences of the civil rights movement. Because again, we talk about, well, there was equality, but we're still not equal. There's still not enough affordable access to affordable health care. There's still unfair and unjust treatment in our world. And even to the point that we still have poverty. So it's important for us to also make parallels at the same issues for which Dr. King fought, maybe with a few exceptions and signs of progress now, but we still are dealing with the issue of poverty. And since he's been gone over 50 years, we're still dealing with poverty now. And if not, it's just getting worse than it's getting better. So I think this conversation is necessary because we need to really look at King as a human, King as a theologian, King as a pastor, King as a prophet, and all that King and all the roles that King carried while he lived for 39 years on this earth.
Agreed, definitely. You said a mouthful there, and it's a couple of places that we have a direction that we're trying to go here, and I might veer off of that for a second. I'm known to veer off the beaten path, but I do want to ask, when you mentioned, from a spiritual, religious perspective, are churches talking about Dr. King in this way? Do you feel that is happening? What you said that Black churches should be doing on April the 4th. Do you feel that is something that falls in alignment with the way Black churches are typically the conversations that are being had to congregations? Is that in alignment with what you've seen?
In my area, the answer is no. What happens in our area when it comes to the King holiday weekend is there's a dinner. I mean, pre-COVID, of course, there would be a dinner on Friday night. There would be an HBCU career fair on Saturday. Then sometimes Sunday late afternoon, evenings, there may be an MLK service, maybe interfaith, maybe one ministerial organization in the area who would sponsor it. And then you have the King Day of Service, where people in the community and sponsored by organizations would devote to cleanup and whole breakfast and also and the media would just play sound bites, focus on I Have a Dream. I mean, rarely since I've been paying attention, I've not seen any of the press, maybe with the exception of Democracy Now! on Link TV, because usually what Democracy Now! Does on the King holiday observance is to share a lesser known speech, something that we hardly hear. So it may not be I Have a Dream. It may be A Time to Break Silence, or it may be a letter from a Birmingham jail. But that's not something that's not something I've seen on mainstream media, and that's not something I've seen in the community. Now, April 4th. Now, as far as April 4th and the dichotomy that's happening this year, I'd be interested to pose those questions to some of the pastors in the area and get their thoughts. But rarely I would hear experienced pastors saying something about Dr. King. I know for me, the last 2 Sundays, I focused on some aspects of King. Yesterday, I looked at King as one who was concerned about the plight of humanity, one who had a priestly concern for people. Last Sunday, I focused on his prophetic concern and connected him to Habakkuk. And then yesterday connected him to the life and legacy of Jesus. So as a way for us to gain a greater awareness of King's life, and that what we see in the media is not the full story. And that's what I'm sure that we'll do tonight, as we've started, is to tell the story that has not been told about Dr. King. So my answer to your question, no. I think beyond surface level, there may be places across the country. Well, of course, Ebenezer in Atlanta, sure, King's birth home, and maybe a few other churches, but in my area, no, not as much. Maybe a social justice forum. I'll take that back. There would be one held during this time, but outside of that, what you intend to do tonight, I haven't been exposed to that in our area.
Well, and I think it's safe to say that that's probably what's going on, for the most part around the country. And I think that question was worth asking because, we as Black people, you have people with all different spiritual and religious beliefs and backgrounds. But no matter what that may be, I believe that we can all agree that the majority of our community identifies as Christian. So no matter what anybody tuned in, faith or belief may be, there's a very good chance that your mom, your grandma, your aunts, your uncles, and the majority of people in your family identify as Christian. And also, pre-COVID, I know that on Sunday and maybe Wednesdays is the time when you have the biggest captive, I won't say captive, but captivated Black audience. The time where most of us are congregated together. So the perspective that you bring, I think, is very important and relevant because that's the place where, again, most of the Black people are gathering in mass consistently. So to a point of what you said, that sounds pretty formulaic. And a lot of us, I think things become routine and they become formulaic, and it's time for us to do these particular things. And not saying that these things are not, good things to do. But again, unpacking him. And so you talked about the fact that you and Rodney talked about the fact that he was hated, talking about the fact of humanizing him. And I will say, with all the years that I have of working with children, one of the things that grinds my gears the worst is when I ask children, what do they know about Dr. King? And they say he had a dream. And I'm not upset with them. I'm never upset with our beautiful babies, but I am upset with the fact that, again, it goes to show the whitewashing, the minimizing of him and saying that he was a dreamer. I brought up a couple of times the deification of him, to where as we unpack his life and you make someone out to be like they are a deity, then it makes it seem like that it minimizes the work that they've done. And it makes it seem like that other people cannot aspire to do things that are impactful, just as impactful or impactful in their own ways. So let's talk about the humanization of Dr. King. Let's see. I want to go down here to Mr. Sturgeon, to Joseph. If you were to get started on humanizing Dr. King, what are some things that people need to know about him as far as being a man? I like to bring up the fact that he was not tall. That
5'7", 5'7".
That's right.
5'7".
Stocky. Mm-hmm.
I like to talk about the fact that he was married. He had children. And for those of us who are, a little further up in age, you understand that as you begin to acquire more of these things, responsibilities, people who you are responsible for, that it's more risk that you are, the fact that you begin to take risks, there's more there because it's not just you who you necessarily have to worry about. So there are burdens that come on you that way, because it's like, if I'm 21 years old and I want to go out here and rah, that's me. But if I am, 26, if I'm 29 and he only lived to be 39, and I have a wife and I have children, I have to look out for them. And then he also had the weight of a movement. And like you mentioned, Rodney, other people It's very important that that is duly noted, because to make it seem like it was one person makes it, again, minimize the importance of the community, of the people coming together to make things happen, and all the brilliant minds and all the people who were sacrificed. But as he was thrust to the forefront of this movement, so now you have a 5'7" man, young man, who has a family, children, a wife and children, and a whole movement, people all around the country, Black people who are, enamored by him, people who are judging every move that he makes, people who have a lot of respect for him, and people who vehemently hate his existence. And all of this is happening, all right? And so before I get to you, Joseph Laurent, what age would you say that he was when he was thrust into the forefront of this movement?
I'll probably say, let's see, he went to Dexter Avenue when he was about 26 years old. And so December 1st, yeah, so I'll probably say 26 or 27.
26, 27. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that 26, 27. Let's talk about what 26 and 27-year-olds are doing in 2020. Not saying that they're doing anything bad. I'm just saying that level of responsibility. So Joseph, let's get into humanizing Dr. King. I'm going to leave that broad because I want to hear what you're bringing.
I think the first thing that I would point to when it comes to humanizing Dr. King is the fact that throughout his life, he struggled with mental health issues. Because as you alluded to several times already, he wasn't a very liked man. If you look at some polls from the civil rights movement, there were times where his approval rate among Americans, just white Americans typically, his disapproval rate was 62 to 70%. So it was kind of like he had an entire country against him. And when you're someone that is at the forefront of a movement that is pushing against racialized discrimination, racialized violence that impacts your people on a daily basis, you're not going to, just take everything in stride and never take like a seat back and just realize that this is, reality in the United States where I live. And it's a bleak reality that, no human being ever wants to deal with, because the conditions that were going on at that time, the conditions that are put on Black Americans in the United States are inhumane. So those conditions aren't meant to be endured by any human being. They're meant to tear people down. They're meant to bring you despair. So I think when a lot of people look at civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King, they think, well, this person was just always this very confident, sure of themselves, very just emotionless type of deity, when that wasn't really the case for any civil rights any civil rights leader of that era. And it definitely wasn't true of Dr. King, because just like the rest of us, he was a human being. So
definitely. And bringing up that disapproval rate and giving that percentage to that, it's a big turn from how they are portraying him today. And there's a safety again in making it seem like incentive, because, and I meant to play this, and I'm pretty sure, Jameer, if all of you don't know, I planned on having this clip, but I wasn't able to have it. The speech that Stokely Carmichael, that Kwame Ture made after Dr. King was assassinated, and he warned the country, he warned white America that you've messed up by assassinating Dr. King. That he said you would have been better off by killing me, himself, or H. Rap Brown, or somebody who was deemed as being more radical, but you went and killed somebody who tried for a long period of time to move from a place of love and compassion, and you killed him. And we know that the streets, the streets were on fire after that happened. There was civil distress as a result of that. And so I think that it was definitely intentional to go back and, recraft and redo his image and make it seem like that this country actually had love for him, and that the country actually mourned, that white America mourned his passing. And that's just not really that's not how that situation went down at all. And it would be so great if we could play that clip right now. But if you guys, everybody has access to YouTube. So go on there and look up Kwame Ture MLK assassination speech. And, before this, I went back and revisited a lot of footage. And it's really heart-wrenching to watch that, because I say this all the time. When we look at this, when we read this, let's always remember that this is real. Just like we have a heartbeat right now and we are dealing with the things that we are dealing with like this, we can tend to go back and read this stuff like it's a novel or watch it like it's a movie. And this was really going on. Kwame Ture had his shades on, and it was a somber but, immediate, deliberate voice in which he gave that speech. And so, yeah, but Jameer, I want you to jump in. I want you to jump in on the humanization of Dr. King, and parallel that to how they present him today, how they presented him to us since his passing, his assassination.
Absolutely. And what
wait, hold on a second. We gotta recognize a comment here. We gotta recognize a comment here. We have our Miss Shania. How are you doing,
Shania?
Good evening. It's been a while. This is our affirmation princess right here. So we have to let everybody know she's in the building. Glad that you are tuned in. All right, there you go.
I'm glad you did that. Hey, Shania. So like what Joseph was saying was that Dr. King had to struggle with like mental illness, and as well because with the alcoholism and the depression, as well as just the overall weight of being the face of a movement. And the way to one of the ways I would go with humanizing him is understanding who he was fundamentally, and that was he was a Black Southern preacher. I'm in the presence of dogs, and the dog was feeling that one. So we have a word from the choir, and they're feeling this one. But basically, he was a Black Southern preacher at the time, and his message overall was equality, equity, and also universal love. And seeing how that message was met with so much hate, hostility, but he never allowed it to show because he was a leader, he was a shepherd. So, and something that always sticks to my mind is that there was only one documented time where Dr. King was showing emotion to those around him. And that was when the 4 little girls were bombed in that church. And that was said to be one of the only times that they'd seen Dr. King cry publicly. And we have to understand that Dr. King knew that his life was threatened as well as his family, but that was the only time that he cried publicly. And in Kwame Ture's autobiography, he mentions that when he spoke with Dr. King, he said that Dr. King knew that he wasn't going to make it out of the 60s. He knew that he was going to be assassinated. So you have going that whole decade, 10 long years of knowing your life may end, and thinking about how that in itself is a burden on yourself, and yet not allowing it to show, going out in public with little to no entourage because you believe in nonviolence, putting yourself in the most selfless and treacherous position for the sake of your people. So I would basically going about humanizing Dr. King is letting people know that he held on to his convictions in a way that may seem godlike or unhuman, but that is probably the height of humanity, following one's truth and path to the point where you don't even see yourself making it out, but for the sole purpose of leading other people to make it out. And humanizing him is definitely understanding who he was and understanding that theological, that Southern upbringing that he had. So understanding that he was Black, that he was a man, but most importantly, that he was deeply religious and he was a preacher and a reverend in every sense of the word would be how I would go about humanizing Dr. King as a first step.
All right, as you said a word there, you said a lot of words there, and I want to piggyback on what you said a little bit. Then I'm gonna go to you, Rodney. I'm gonna jump back to Joseph for a minute. when you talked about that disapproval rating, I want us, because I'm always like, let's put this into context right now. Some of us get weary and beat down because of social media. And sometimes it's not even people coming for us. We see the bickering that goes on between other people, and we can deem it as a negative space, and we need to get away from it. And then those of us who are on social media and speak truth to power, and you sometimes have disagreements with people, and you have people coming for you saying all kinds of horrible things. You see that this bothers people psychologically in a lot of ways. So imagine to what Jameer and Joseph just stated, where you know that people are possibly actively trying to kill you and your family, and that they are killing people who look like you. They're killing children. And you have people on one hand saying you need to do more, and people on the other end saying stop it, you're agitating, you're a rabble rouser. And it's coming from, and the latter, it's coming from both sides. You have Black people who are like, you need to do more. And then you may have Black people like, calm down, you are causing problems. And of course, you had white people saying that to him. In the meantime, you have this wife whom you love, and your children who you're supposed to protect, and all of these people looking up to. I just really want to think, when Joseph talked about mental health, like, these things could not have been easy. Then you all spoke, I think if it wasn't on your last show on 2050 and Beyond, it was the show before that, about martyrdom, about what it means to be a martyr, and what that had to be like to move with the sense of purpose. Because a lot of us right now, we do the social media activism, and we may do activism in ways like what Dr. Wilder talked about in the front, in the beginning, of having these celebratory things. But the things where you get out there and you are really risking your life, and this, not too many people are willing to do that today. Not too many people are willing to do that today. So Rodney, I'm going to, as our influencers would do, I'm going to pass this on over to you. And I know how you bring it. So can you bring us? You got it. So I want you to tell us, as far as humanizing Dr. King, what do you want to add to this discussion?
Well, I would several things I'd just like to respond to. So one, when we talk about humanizing Dr. King, I think the brilliance and strength of Dr. King in the movement is the recognition that we are human and divine. So one cannot separate the human from the spirit. At least I don't think Dr. King would have us to do that. And it is that recognition of having the spirit and the focus and the faith as a human being that allows us and allowed him to do so much that we would call a miracle, but in reality is a reflection of the divine that is within us. I'd also say that, going back to some things that were made earlier, comments that were made earlier, the approval rating that Dr. King had wasn't just low in the so-called white community, it was also low in the so-called Black community. Dr. King spoke to that in his letter from a Birmingham jail about how he stood between these forces. And I mentioned I was reading Strength to Love earlier this morning, and he has some great words of chastisement for both churches. So it's kind of ironic that in 2021 we still talk in terms of Black churches and white churches, as Dr. King talked about Sunday being the most segregated hour of the week. But I think that combination of spirit and human, the fact that he was a man of faith and was able to tap into that and was able to share that strength in that spirit, so that the fear of the body, the fear of death, the fear of being harmed in the body, but not being harmed in the soul, I think is what is at the depth of the accomplishments that he had. So there's much that's already been said in terms of just living your life. I think, Ms. Starr, you touched on an important point. So often when an individual has a family or has things, then those that wish to impact you or divide you or threaten you or so forth, that's where they find your vulnerable point. And so the fact that not only was he living day to day, knowing that at any point in time he may not live, his wife, lived that too. And so that's just a stress and a strain that I don't know if we can really comprehend. I mean, we say we can. It's another thing to have to live it. And so that's part of my personal admiration, for Dr. King and others who put their lives forward, or said earlier, willing to sacrifice for our benefit. I mean, that's just a level of strength that I think we talk about in theory, but oftentimes they say, well, like Mike Tyson used to say, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. So everybody thinks what they would do until it's time for them to take on that level of willing to truly put yourself out there for the benefit of others.
Exactly. So now we're going to move on into another part of Dr. King that I feel humanizes him. In my opinion, this is, as we progress through this conversation, something that shows that he was a person. When you are a leader, which is, listen, if you've ever been a supervisor, if you're running a business and you have employees, if you supervise somebody else's company, if you're leading a household, if you are, any of these things, about leadership, and there's a lot that comes along with it. So when we start talking about a movement this big, and as I went back and revisited some footage again, like I said, I saw how we're definitely talking about that approval rating and how it was low among Black and white people, but there were still people, and it plummeted, that approval rating, but there were people throughout the time that did definitely look up to him and who admired him. And watching some of the footage as to just going back and revisiting this, and when he showed up and he seemed to be a beacon of hope for a lot of people. So a leader, it entails a lot, right? And so leaders want to make the right decisions. Leaders have to be comfortable with failure. Because it's inevitable that you at some point may not make the right decision, but it's not always easy. And so I want to get on this quote in which when he spoke to Harry Belafonte, and he said, "I fear that I have integrated my people into a burning house." So when Dr. King, a lot of times they talk about the "I have a dream" speech again, and it's, the integration trope. And it is, little Black boys and little Black girls will hold hands and, all of that stuff. And again, the part of the deification and the sanitization and the whitewashing of him is, making it seem like that's the totality. He told Harry Belafonte, "I fear I may have integrated my people into a burning house." So the path, the course in which we have been going, I think it is something that is to our detriment. Now, faced with a situation like this, there are some people who would say, you know what, this, and think about it as a leader on a smaller scale. You know what, I got to ride this thing out, because I can't say that I was wrong. I can't admit that, the way that I've been taking everybody, that I may have taken you down the wrong turn. So I'm just gonna have to ride this thing out and see where it takes us. Or they may just back out of, just not wanting to deal with that. But he made this realization and he started down a different path. So I want to put a pin in that. Because we're getting ready to unpack that. But I did say we are doing giveaways tonight. We have 4 books that we're giving away. So the first book is by Dr. King, Why We Can't Wait. All right. So if you are watching right now, the first person, and I mentioned this before, we are streaming on multiple platforms. So we get all the comments right here. You guys, wherever you're from, you may not be able to see them all. So please don't get angry at us. But the first person in our comments who can tell us the name of Dr. King's last speech, Dr. King's last speech, and we will announce this at the end of the program tonight. This will be yours. So the first person who can tell us the name of his last speech, we will mail this out to you. Okay. So taking the pen out of that, and we're going to go down here to Dr. Wilder. I fear I have integrated my people into a burning house. We've done the Montgomery bus boycott. We've done, all the marches. We've done all of these different things. And now I am sitting back as a leader and I'm assessing this. And I'm like, this may not have been the right move. And a burning house is horrific. Nobody wants to be going inside of a burning house. So how does that speak, in your opinion, to the humanity of Dr. King? And if you want to unpack the depth of that statement to Dr. Wilder.
Great question, and definitely great quote, because I think that what it does is paint the picture as to not only how real the issues were that King was wrestling, but I think what it also does is remind us of the fact that he was someone who constantly contemplated on decisions. I think there were times where he may have struggled with self-doubt, and so to the point where in his decision making at times he wasn't the one who always made the decision. At times he would talk it over with friends and allies until he discerned for himself what was the right decision. But I think when it comes to thinking about the burning house, I think that a lot of the issues with which he confronted did not find an end to them. I mean, and even though we think about, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we think about the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as public policy milestones. But I think that I think when he saw that there were greater issues, I think it just came to a place where, I'm not saying he possibly didn't have solutions to them, but I think some of them were so deep. I think it would have taken a lot more time to have found resolution to those issues. I mean, as I said earlier, poverty is still with us. While racism may not have been as overt as it was at his time, I mean, it has shown up a lot here. I think, and one of the things that I've told my students is that what we've seen the last 4 years is a reminder of how ugly our history really is. I said I could not imagine, and it happened to a young man in the Ferguson, Missouri area several years ago, where his mother had found him hung in the back of her yard. And I say that to say some of the things we didn't think we would see or hear about, that was only something of the past, it's definitely something that has found its way in the present. So I think when we think about the metaphor of a burning house, I just think that it's a reminder of some of these issues have not and do not have an expiration date to them. And we have to constantly engage, confront, and decide how we're going to move forward with that. I think Dr. King, in his moments, again, he was someone who contemplated and reflected and wrestled, and even to the point where at times he would be doubtful of an outcome. So I think that when you think about the burning house, I think again it's just a reminder of the fact that a lot of the issues with which he confronted, he could not end up doing it by himself, and we're dealing with the same issues in which he faced.
Yeah, and if I could add, I also think we have to finish the rest of the story in the quote. So I know I hear this quote often. The follow up is Harry Belafonte then asked Dr. King, "Well, what should we do? And Dr. King's response, according to Harry Belafonte, was that we should then be firemen and not allow for the house to burn down with us in it. And so I think oftentimes there's this view, because Dr. King believed in this beloved community and felt it was important that we say integration. Dr. King did describe the difference between desegregation and integration. So point one was to move towards desegregation because of the humiliating effect that he felt that it had on our we talked about mental health, on our mental health. And every day going by and being treated as second class and not being able to avail ourselves of things that are that should be due us as being a part of this country. Integration, he said, was at a different level where you genuinely had relationships and respect, and as he described it, love for one another. So what I take away from that particular quote is the fact that Dr. King said we still need to be the firemen, if you will, because what he was describing was what he saw was the moral decay of the country as it dealt with issues of poverty, as it dealt with issues of race, as it dealt with issues of white supremacy. And that if anybody was going to lead the country towards reaching the ideals that it professed to have, it was going to be those of us who had the experience or came over as enslaved Africans, who appreciate freedom, who appreciate what it's like to have to sojourn as we did. So I appreciate the quote. I think is a very important quote and something that we need to talk about in terms of the humanistic part of him, if you will, but I also think we cannot shy away from his charge that we still be the ones that provide the leadership, both morally, spiritually, physically, economically, to this country. Yet the house burned down, and it burned down with us in it.
Here, Dr. Wilder, we were having some issues with your audio. So if you could check our chat, and Jameer is going to give you some pointers on some things, because we want to be able to hear you. This happens. This definitely happens. So we're glad that you're here, because sometimes people float in and out. But great point, Rodney. And to speak to that, I think it would be remiss if we don't talk about the fact that let's talk about this integration thing, and let's talk about the love our enemies and all of that, because when we say the dichotomy of how people in the beginning, when I talked about how people as far as his legacy, especially within the Black community, you either get like I said, I think it's three types of people. The people who just know the main things that they're told about him. I have a dream, and cool, that's great, yay, Dr. King. And then you get the people who are like, yes, love in the face of hatred, and love my enemies, and that is important, and that is how we should be. And then you have the people who say flat out they don't have respect for him, they don't like him because of that stance that he had. So I would like for somebody to unpack that position, and then we go into the burning house, like the fact that he changed. But I think I want to back up a little bit and talk about him as the person. And Ronnie and I had some, conversations and a little bit of disagreements, like we always do, but that's what makes our conversations fun. I personally am not, if you are out to harm me, if you are out to harm my community, if you are out to harm people who I love, I don't love you. That's just straight up how it is. At the same time, and I would not tell anybody to do that. At the same time, being someone who is from the South, who is from Gadsden, Alabama, and the granddaughter of freedom fighters, I can remember, I'm nowhere near, the age that Dr. King, he was gone well before I was born. But even growing up in Gadsden, Alabama, some of the conversations that I heard and the thickness of the racism, and even I'm actually home right now visiting family, and so the racism is different. I'm not saying that going other places, but when you're in the dirty South, it's dirty for a reason. And so the harsh critiques of him, while like I said, I'm not the one. I don't turn cheeks. I'm also not trying to start, violence upon anybody either. But nonetheless, I think some of that harsh critique, people have not been in the South, and people have also not done number crunching to, think about if you wanted anybody, to wage an insurrection. Like, I have not seen anybody successfully do that thus far. And so I think the people on that side who say they don't have respect for him are not thinking about what it was like back then when somebody could just walk up and, just hang you or beat you or do anything to you or your wife or your children, and nothing would happen. They were bombing churches, in Alabama. Birmingham was called Bombingham, Alabama. I've been to 16th Street Baptist Church many, many years later. And I mean, I was just a pool of tears. So taking all of those things into account, again, I'm gonna pass it over. I'm going. Let me see. Is it gonna be Jameer or is it gonna be Jordan? Jordan just spoke, so I'm gonna toss it on over to Jameer, one of our young folks, and I want you to talk about that King message of loving your enemy and having, having love in the face of hatred, and this nonviolent march, and then moving on this nonviolent movement, and then moving on to this burning house. I fear I have integrated my people to a burning house.
Okay, so with that like eternal love message, I believe that the reason why it's been very easy to co-opt Martin Luther King Jr. is because he was a devout Christian and his belief was based deeply in love, which allowed his enemies to then harm him and his community in whichever way they wanted to, and then respond in kind with, but you're supposed to turn the other cheek. And I feel like there's a fundamental misunderstanding or a deliberate muddling of the message, because the love has to be reciprocal. And there's a love that Martin Luther King Jr. wouldn't go out and actively harm anyone, but he was a conduit for the movement, and we saw what happens when that conduit was disrupted. There was no love. There was much violence in the streets. And the message of nonviolence in itself is that I won't harm you, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to be confrontational. And there's a love for all humanity, and then there's a love for respecting that humanity, which comes with the demanding for the change of the status quo. And understanding why their people were marching, it was a march for the love of justice, not for the love of individual humans who are also terrorizing people, but of a higher message and a higher being of humanity, of a sense of humanity. And understanding that this love then turns into this burning house, and it wasn't burned out or extinguished, but he simply sought to turn that love away from the burning house, in a sense of continuing to march in there, but to turn away and get the tools necessary to extinguish the fire. And that in itself requires a different kind of love that was seen, because we've seen that the message of nonviolence was still there, but he started calling out the US military in Vietnam. He started calling out the housing discrimination and the economic discrimination. And we see that the message isn't a love for the country or a single love for individual persons, but a love for people, all humanity. And it's a fundamental key principle of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to understand that this isn't a simplistic love that you would have for a family member, but a love that sort of transcends even yourself, because he loved people so much that he knew he wasn't going to make it out of the decade. And sort of understanding that this is a love that is required, because nonviolence in itself means that you personally won't go out there and harm anyone else, but you cannot speak for everyone also. And you have to take that into consideration. And this is just understanding that, yes, I am going to be nonviolent and I'm going to encourage others to be nonviolent. But at the end of the day, everyone is autonomous. So it'd be easier for you to understand and love me back, or at least respect my humanity, before somebody who is a little less Christian and a little less loving than me walks onto the scene and forgets trying to extinguish the house, but helps you burn it. And then, yeah. So with that question, it would be more so understanding that this is a love that requires reciprocity instead of just a one-sided love that then turns to turning the other cheek, because after a while there will be no more cheeks to turn and people will become angry. In short,
That was excellent. That was excellent. I think where Rodney and I, have a Rodney, I think you fall in alignment with what Jameer said. And I feel like I do believe that at one point, Dr. King felt like that you could appeal to. I understand that there were strategies to the nonviolent movement, but I do believe that at one point he felt that you could appeal to people's sense of humanity, and that at some point people would recognize what they were doing and what was happening as being wrong and as being harmful, and that it would make them want to do better and to change their ways. I think some of that was tactical and some of that was an actual belief. And I do think that at some point he began to realize that no, these people are horrible. Like it does not matter to them. We can be pummeled upside our heads. Children can be attacked. Children can be killed. Women can be attacked, and all these things can happen. And there's no change. I mean, and looking at some of that footage, it's horrible. Like looking at, and it speaks to the dichotomy of being a Black person in the United States of America, living in a country where we pretend that these particular things did not happen. And so, and the things that are happening right now are not happening. And so he lived during that time. I was looking at that footage and sometimes I laugh and I'm like, it's not funny. But I was looking at the footage of when C.T. Vivian was, standing there trying to get them to allow them to register to vote. And the sheriff literally turned his back. He is saying the most moralistic, intelligent things that a person could say to try to appeal to one's humanity, and it was logical and all of these things. And that man turned his wide back on him. And then when they proceeded to try to go into that building, they knocked him upside the head with a billy club. And it's horrible. It's really horrible to watch these particular things. And so I do believe that at one point Dr. King felt that people would do better. And then I think at some point he realized they're not. And he did not cower. But anyway, I'm passing this on to the other youth down here, to Joseph. So speaking on that nonviolent civil disobedience and the loving one's enemy, and then where he transpired, where he went on to. What would you like to add? What are your thoughts on that?
I think one thing that's important to note, because we've alluded several times throughout this panel that there was always a schism between Martin Luther King and other civil rights activists, in the sense that others were like, yeah, if we ever want to bring about progress or any type of radical progress within the United States, we're going to have to take up arms. We're going to have to get violent. We're going to have to loot. We're going to have to riot. But it wasn't necessarily a schism, and like these leaders weren't at odds with each other. And I remember just a couple of days ago, I was seeing this video of Kwame Ture, and I think it was post MLK's assassination. And what he was saying was, regardless of whatever MLK believed, you have to give that man respect because he stuck to his beliefs and he didn't conform to anyone else's. At the end of the day, he showed up and he was on the front lines getting beat with billy clubs. He was there when people were getting, all types of pushback from the state and from, the angry white mob. and he still showed up the next day to do his job. And I point that video out because it was also interesting because I saw another video, and it was of Muhammad Ali, and he was speaking on the yard, and there was this white journalist, and this white journalist asked him, he was like, oh no, what happened was he cited Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, on the yard. Muhammad Ali saw him, and he got really excited and very happy. But the white journalist, he asks Muhammad Ali, I thought you disagreed with Carmichael's philosophies. And he was like, no, that's my brother. And he said, people are always going to have different approaches to how to get to liberation. But he was like, at the end of the day, we all have the same common goal, and we know what the issue here is. And as long as it's not counterproductive and we all show up, that's really all that matters. And in addition to that, he also said, the reporter asked specifically, how do you feel about all of the other Black philosophies? And he was like, all of them, they are all my brothers. And I just found that to be really, really endearing, because a lot of people try to look at the civil rights movement as this very decentralized thing where people were just infighting a lot. And that's not necessarily what it was, because everyone had a somewhat unified idea of what they wanted to happen and how they wanted it to occur, just different approaches to the issue. And whether it's MLK or whether it was Stokely Carmichael, they were all there. So
exactly. Great insight. And I just want to remind everybody tuned in that Joseph and Jameer are 18. Okay. Let that sink in. So, all right, Jordan, I know you want to add something to that.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me state that the nonviolent movement for social change that we commonly call the civil rights movement, and all the diversity that Joseph just spoke to, is the greatest movement that the world has known to date. From South Africa to around the globe, the entire world looks to learn lessons from that great movement as to how you bring about change. And while we may be at the railroad crossing at our journey, waiting for the train to pass by before we continue on, we did experience and have experienced great progress as a result of that effort and that continuing effort. As we start off the show talking about the whitewashing or the reprogramming of Dr. King's movement, sometimes I worry that we are victims of the very thing that we are challenging, because we ourselves find ourselves discussing Dr. King and the civil rights movement in this dichotomy, which I think is much more broader than that. And then at the root of it, Dr. King, as has been said earlier, was a man of faith, a believer and follower of Jesus the Christ as he saw him. And so the message around loving your enemy is rooted in lessons that Dr. King and others felt came from the message of Jesus. And just as Jesus was speaking to an oppressed people who were under occupation of the Roman government, likewise, Dr. King was speaking to an oppressed people who were under oppression. So it wasn't necessarily the case that his initial message was for the Roman government or for Pharaoh. The message was to his fellow people who were oppressed. And just as we all know in our relationships that we deal with every day, oftentimes you can get in an argument with someone and you hold these resentment, you hold this anger, how somebody has treated you, they've moved on. And you hold that thing in and you keep that thing in to the point that it begins to destroy you and eat away at your own soul, which then impacts your ability to have your own growth and development occur, never mind having positive impact on somebody else. So what is rooted in the concept of love your enemy is I believe Dr. King was speaking to those of us who are oppressed and living under this occupation at any point in time, where the government could have clearly murdered us all if they so chose to do so. He was trying to say to us, in this movement, it is a spiritual movement. And so the concept of loving your enemy and turning the other cheek did not mean that you go allow somebody to brutalize you. What is at the root of it is you do not allow the what you are experiencing and what you are seeing to eat away at your soul, that you are so consumed with hatred for another human being that it denies you the opportunity to provide the spiritual leadership and allow you the opportunity to grow and prosper and receive what it is that he felt and others felt God is able to communicate to us. So if you can't find a way to really put that in that context and pull back the onion, if you will, around that deep belief, whether you agree with the belief or not, but it is rooted in that spiritual element, it is rooted in that faith, it is rooted in that belief of loving your enemy, because at one point in time we are all enemies to each other, and we all can be an affront to God if you believe in God. And so that's where that is rooted. And I think in our discussion of these topics sometimes, or we, as I think both Joseph and Jameer mentioned earlier, we go back and we watch videos of Malcolm X saying something and Dr. King saying something and Kwame Ture saying something, and then we give it narrow thought versus the depth that it deserves. We find ourselves then having this debate. But again, at the root of what Dr. King was talking about, I believe, is in order for us to make the change, which thank God we did make, and folks were able to stand on the Pettus Bridge, and they were able to do the things that they endured because of that spiritual underpinning. Without that, then I'm not sure we would have had the success that we've experienced. And even right now, as of last week, when you watch folks storm the Capitol, all of us know that if at the March on Washington in 1963, if Black folks had stormed the Capitol the way that Capitol got stormed last week, machine guns and all kinds of things would have wiped everybody out. So that spiritual underpinning where Dr. King is speaking to love your enemy is not saying that we should not call out oppression, because he called it out. And we should not call out war, because he called it out. We should not call out materialism, because he called it out. Or you should just allow yourself to be brutalized. He did not ask people to just be brutalized, but it really deals with that spiritual piece around what it means to not allow anyone or anything be a block between you and the creator, because by spiritual definition, anything that blocks you from the creator is sin. So I would encourage those. You can read Dr. Howard Thurman. You can read Dr. Benjamin Mays, both who had significant influence on Dr. King, and you can see where you can love your enemy and at the same time be a strong social justice warrior in the battle for freedom, justice, equity, and all the things that we say that we believe. That's my speech, and I yield to the pastor.
I'm not the pastor, but I'm the host, and I'm gonna say that. But I think that that's where this conversation could get so interesting. And for the sake of time, I'm not gonna go, because we again looking at Dr. King, and you have the people who, and looking at him as a person, and I think that it's perfectly fine to study movements and look at people who were deemed leaders and to critique as long as when you do these critiques that you understand the totality of their situation, because there are things that I do not agree with. Like I, but it does not mean that overall I do not have a profound level of respect or understand the gravity of what I would call a conundrum in which they were in during that time, because the level of hate, the level of vitriol and hostility, and the maze in which, of oppression in which they were in at that point. And then the numbers, when you look at the numbers of Black people versus white people and resources that were available, I think conundrum is a small word to call that. And I think that for people who just throw out critiques and they don't think of that, I think that's very unfair and it's very unrealistic. I do not have that level. I have to say that I don't have that level of resolve or whatever you want to call it, because I would say that if you are out to do me harm, I don't think I have to stew in it or fester in it, but I look at it a different way. I don't think that I would have love for somebody who was looking to thwart my progress or to harm me. But again, these things are admirable, and they are things that we as human beings who are not in that time frame can wrestle with and think about. And I would invite anybody to actually just try to really think about being in Alabama, in Georgia, in Mississippi during that time. And there's way more white people with all the resources. To your point, Rodney, when the people in charge, the people with the guns, with the tanks, with all of these things are white people. They're not people who are on your side. Okay. So all of those are things to bring into consideration when talking about this, whether you are, saying that, the whole concept of loving one's enemy, or whether you're saying that you don't agree with that. I still think the work and the resolve were tremendous. And Rainy, you made me think about, although I don't think that that's wise and it's not something that I would tell anybody to do, you brought up a good point. Would they have been able to do those things without thinking of it that way? Would he have been able to, would they have been able to get people to participate in those demonstrations without phrasing it that way? So we know that, and then in the midst of that, the younger generation comes on, and they're, Black power, and things begin to, there's a shift in things. But with Dr. King, the last question that we had here, and I think everybody got to chime in on.
I don't think Dr. Wilder did.
I thought he did it first. Okay.
No, so that's why I said I yield to him.
Okay. My bad on that. So I thought he did that first. Thank you. So we said the integrating my people into a burning house, and then where he went from there. What are your thoughts on that quote and the subsequent lines that followed that Rodney gave us? And then where Dr. King, he went other places. He began to have another focus, as you all have brought up, with the economic justice, going against the Vietnam War. So, Dr. Wilder, yes.
Can I just say one thing? Dr. King always had economic justice at his root. The boycott, the bus boycott, was about economics. Prior to Dr. King making the speech in 1967, he came out against the Vietnam War earlier. He got so much flack from Lyndon Johnson and others, he was silent on it for about a year and a half. And then he said out of conscience was bothering him. And that's when he came back and made that speech in 1967. So again, I think there's this broader, Dr. King is much more rounded than even we described him. And I don't think that, if my goal is to get to a particular point and I make a right turn then a left turn because there's a brief detour, I'm still on my goal to that point. And so I think where Dr. King was trying to lead us and to lead this country was always a clear end goal. I don't see whether it's the war in Vietnam or the war on poverty that he was working on, the Poor People's Campaign, or right before he was assassinated, or the Montgomery bus boycott, or all the different places in between, all those things go together to me in a circle. And I think too often we follow the European thought of things being binary. I don't think they are binary. I really think it is a circle.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. So if you caught that from what I was saying, I don't disagree with that. Like when you know that you have a goal, and I mean, again, speaking to the humanity of him, and I believe that he became louder about certain things at a certain point, and I do believe that he came to realizations along the way that made him, look at certain things differently. I don't think that any of this is linear. I definitely agree that it is circular. That is a part of being a leader. And anybody, again, who is led, that you may have a focus right now more so on this. Or I think it speaks to the humanity of the person. I think all of that speaks in what we are here to talk about tonight. That is no slight against him. But if it was all polished, as they try to make it out to be, if it was just a perfect straight line that he went to that they try to make it out to be, then to me it wouldn't be as remarkable. And it would be that it was some type of deity and a person who, had a blueprint given to them and all they had to do was just skip down the line. And that's not the case. And I think that's what the brilliance of this and why this is conversation worthy, exactly to what you just said. So, Dr. Wilder, if you can take us on down that path with the burning house and then the subsequent quote, the follow up to that Rodney gave us, and where the path that is the path that Dr. King went on.
What is loving your enemies about?
What was that, Rodney?
I said you were referencing loving your enemies, so I was just bringing that piece back to.
Okay, yeah, because right now I'm the only non-enemy lover up here, so yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Wilder.
So just as can you all hear me well? Okay, good. I think that I think if we had to just really think about all that was shared tonight, I think one definitely was important too.
We are still having some difficulties with hearing you. Are you able to do it without the headphones? Have you tried it without the headphones?
Let me see if I can. Let's see.
Oh no, now we can't hear you at all. Jamir, do you have any suggestions to our Jamir is our in front of the camera and behind the camera expert here. So I have to yield to Jamir. Do you have any suggestions here? You guys, we're doing all things virtually now, so this is par for the course. This happens. Dr. Wilder is doing better than me because typically I'm the one who would fade off the screen.
Yeah, you can try the earbuds again because you were fine in the first half, and then it started to shift. So it could be just the bandwidth issue, but
most likely.
Can you hear me a little bit?
Very garbled.
Still a little choppy.
Can you hear me a little bit?
It's a little choppy, but I think we can make it work.
We can push through and just mute everybody.
Unless you want to take me off, take me to the back of the station and bring me back up, if that'll make a difference.
Yes, Jamir, can you try that?
Yeah, I got it.
Everybody tuned in. Don't go anywhere again. We're in this virtual space, and this is what happens. I had so many technical difficulties before we got up here. I don't even want to talk about it. Anyway, I hope you all are enjoying this conversation. And I'm going to go ahead while they are working that out. And we have another book here, and it is The Radical King. And our next question is, what year was the letter from the Birmingham jail written? What year? Give us the date. Give us the date on that. And whomever answers that first, this one is yours. This is yours. We are going to ship this out to you. So the letter from the Birmingham jail, what year was that written? So whomever gives us that comment and the correct comment first, the correct answer, that's your book. So now let's see how we're doing here with Dr. Wilder. Can you say something, Dr. Wilder? Can we hear your voice? Oh man, it's worse now. Now we can't hear you at all.
Headphones.
Yeah, let's go back. Let's go back to the headphones. We are going to go back to the headphones with that because we definitely want to hear what everybody has to say. I'm going to go to the next question. So we have another question here that I'm going to ask you guys. Okay, while we try to troubleshoot, so we can hear Dr. Wilder. So the next question, and this is the book that we have here. I know this is not a Dr. King book, but this is a book because this is always a good time for this. And so we have the Miseducation of the Negro. All right. So our next question is, what was the name of the church King pastored during the Montgomery bus boycott? What was the name of the church that King pastored during the Montgomery bus boycott? And we will announce the winners at the end of the program. Okay, so whoever can answer that one, then the Miseducation of the Negro belongs to you. If you have already read any of these books, feel free to pass these books on to people in your life who you know can benefit from them. I think books are the best gifts, right? So now let's see how things are going with Dr. Wilder. Let's see if I think we can hear you. What did you say? Are y'all able to hear him?
Currently, no.
Can you say something again, Dr. Mike? Can you give us a testing, 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, testing.
Okay, we can hear you. We can hear you now. So do you need me to repeat that question or are you good? It's like we can hear you sometimes and then sometimes we can't. I've got the question again was I fear that I have integrated my people into a burning house, and the whole concept of loving our enemies, and then where Dr. King, the path that he went on after this statement that he made, or realization
I think
that he came to.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I think that I think as we think about all the things that were talked about tonight, I think one thing that's definitely important is for us to be aware that there were some unintended consequences of what happened as a result of the civil rights movement. I think I think that one of them, as far as integrating into society, I think that I'm not sure if he intended or had the awareness that I think he foresaw what was an unintended consequence. And I think that when we think about integration, we think about the aftermath of traditional Black communities that were affected by the increased mobility of the middle class. And again, it wasn't to say that it wasn't important to increase the social mobility, but poverty, the concern with poverty has been an issue that has not gone away in over 50 years. And so I think that integrating into society meant giving up what was dear and meaningful for us as a people, because we moved out of our neighborhoods. We no longer supported as strongly our businesses that we once had when we were living in the same community. I think that just unintended consequences gives us a chance to really examine, in the way that you describe, Star earlier as to how we offer constructive critiques when we think about Dr. King and the legacy he had. I think that when it came to loving our enemies, the word agape comes to mind. And it's it's the ability to love beyond oneself and through this satyagraha, the soul force that thought that Dr. King followed through Gandhi's teaching. I think that with keeping in mind the best of his faith, the best of Gandhi's teachings. One thing for sure, other than that, Dr. King was a pastor, he was a systematic theologian. And that meant that he was able to take the best of what he learned and put them to work to ensure that his goal of a love community was meaningful. So that's what so I think that's what I think. So in Dr. King's humanist, he sought to build on the strengths that he discovered and use them to move us toward our greatest potential and highest good. And that's something constant we have to reflect, to contemplate as we think about Dr. King's legacy and what that means not only for us as individuals. What does that mean for us as as a community? What does that mean for us as a nation and world? And so Dr. King, in his humanness, I think, was definitely one who did the best he could to be aware of what shortcomings may have happened.
All right. Yeah, I definitely regret that we're having this technical difficulty here because we were able to decipher what you were saying, but I do wish we would have been able to hear it more clearly because you definitely stated some important things. We are also trying to look and figure out some like how we can. If it's not that I'm not listening to you, we are trying to figure out these technical issues as well. But I appreciate your input on that, and hopefully, I'm going to go into the last question that we're going to discuss here, and hopefully, we can get these things working with your sound. The last thing, again, the conversation, whether we think it's a fruitful conversation or not. I hear so many people criticize Dr. King about being passive, about, again, there's either he was a saint and, again, the deification of him, or it's people chopping him up into pieces because they say that he was weak, he was passive. I remember even one time when I was in high school that a classmate called the civil rights movement. She was like, "No, I don't like that. I didn't like them because they were a bunch of punks." And I saw red, like especially Young Star from Alabama. I saw red with that statement, and I responded with red. I don't respond with red anymore as an adult, but nonetheless, would it be fair? We seem to be a lot of points in our community. We are fascinated by revolutionaries. We love that word. We love that phrase, and we like for people to be revolutionaries. Those are the people who we revere. So would we be able to call Dr. King a revolutionary? Was he a revolutionary? Why or why not? And I will start this time with Jordan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was revolutionary. And like I said, the entire civil rights movement was revolutionary. What other examples can we think of considering the circumstances under which I'm just going to use the civil rights movement context because we know it was a baton that was passed generation to generation. But in that context, the civil rights movement and the outcomes and the impact that it achieved was absolutely revolutionary. It saved the country. There's for all the conversation that we have today about the challenges that we still face, and Lord knows we face a lot of them. We also saw and continue to see a great deal of positive impact that occurred as a result of Dr. King and the civil rights movement. So all the things that we talked about before in terms of putting yourself on the front line, the things that you did at the age of 25, 26, 27, being assassinated at 39, building faith, the fact of being able to change perceptions and realities is definitely revolutionary. So, again, for those in the Christian faith that consider Jesus the Christ a revolutionary, which I do, and to the extent that Dr. King sought to model himself or follow in those footsteps, then absolutely I would consider him a revolutionary. I don't think revolution always has to be at the barrel of a gun. There's the revolution of the soul, there's a revolution of the mind, and there's the revolution of the change of a culture of a people. And I definitely would consider Dr. King a revolutionary in that regard.
Joseph?
Yeah. So before I answer, I think that it's important to really note what defines a revolutionary, because I feel like when trying to define it, a lot of people tend to go with, the most simple and basic definition of it, which is, oh, did this person, overthrow an entire government and replace it with their own new conception of one that is just completely different from the one that they overthrew, which I don't think it can ever be considered that simple, because before there ever is, an actual revolution of any type of civilization, there's always the people that just shifted the paradigms of how that entire society thinks about the society they're living in, because a lot of people don't tend to question or challenge the society that they're living in until, there's this figure that comes along and is like, maybe you should think about this way, or maybe you should just challenge this phenomenon in this certain way. And MLK was like that. But if you look at any point in history and you look at any movements that have occurred, it always is an incremental process. There are a lot of leaders leading up to, the tipping point, the breaking point that inevitably occurs that shifted the paradigms and radicalized, just large groups of people to get to that point. And if you consider those people revolutionaries, then yes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a revolutionary.
Agreed. Let's see how things are going with Dr. Wilder here. Let's see. No, we're not ready. Jameer, are you saying no?
He seems a little slow.
Okay.
See, he did seem a little slow, so I wanted to ask him first before we got on.
I'll leave that alone. All right, so then we'll go to Jameer. Dr. King, revolutionary or nah?
Well, I think that, I like words and I'm a nerd. So when we understand what a revolution is, it's just a turning or a change of something. And Dr. King is easily fits the bill of a revolutionary. And how we ended 2050 and beyond, we talked about the Black radical tradition and how it was a cultural phenomenon that was just affirming Blackness. And that's exactly what Dr. King did, because if the masses of the people weren't affirmed with his message, then they wouldn't have been out in the streets whatsoever. And in the same vein of what Mr. Jordan said, that a revolution doesn't always come at the barrel of a gun. It's just the one that a lot of people remember because there's usually a death toll. And not saying the civil rights didn't have a death toll, because it surely did, but it came at our expense. And that's probably one of the harder things to remember, which is why understanding and remembering Dr. King is one of the harder things to do, especially when you have the people who murdered him try to martyr him and use his message to sort of pacify him. And we have to understand that Dr. King couldn't have been a pacifist, because I don't remember white people going out and hating a pacifist. They most definitely saw him as a militant and violent person who needed to be dealt with. And revolutionaries don't get assassinated. I mean, pacifists don't get assassinated. Revolutionaries tend to do so. And understanding that he did bring a change, and whether that is the change that people want to see is up to the interpretation of the person. But I most surely see Dr. King as a revolutionary, just for the fact that, like Joseph said, is that revolutions are typically incremental, and it's a cause and effect, and there is no de facto or certain person who is going to lead anyone. It is a continuous passing of the baton, and all of these different figures and these leaders and these people work together in order to push a goal, and that goal is Black liberation. And Dr. King is surely a revolutionary because he knew that it was a intergenerational struggle, which is why he continued to persist, even though he knew that he would be assassinated, and he put his life on the line because he knew that there would be people like us after him who would continue his message. And whether we adapt and work and alter that message to meet the goals and times that we live in now is up to us. But he did his part, and that was picking up the baton from those he learned from, and then moving forward with that. So I would most definitely say that Dr. King is a revolutionary, and anyone who doesn't really understand the business of revolution.
And Star, if I could just come back and add something that is.
Go ahead. I saw you too. Your eyes like lit up and everything.
As I said earlier, it's about to whom the message is being delivered. And I think sometimes we take the perspective when the collective when we talk about Dr. King, we speak in terms of his message to, quote, the larger society. I'm talking about his message to us. So Dr. King said that a person can't ride your back unless you are bending over. And so what Dr. King's message to us, the revolutionary message to us, was you must stand up. You must have this dignity. You can't let somebody just continue to treat you as second class. And so his attack on white supremacy, his attack on segregation, all of that was about trying to instill pride in us, which we talked about earlier, that Stokely Carmichael's and others picked up, SNCC, and folks picked up on, and that's where the Black Power and James Brown and Soul Power and all that came from. It is rooted in you must stand up and no longer allow anybody to treat you as a second-class citizen. So that psychological, spiritual impact that Dr. King and the movement had on us in terms of no longer bending over and being willing to stand, even if it was through this nonviolent social change movement, was revolutionary in and of itself in terms of the psychosis and the psychology that it had on Black people, never mind the psychology that it also had on white America and the world.
Agree. I think we all agree on that. And to Joseph's point, a lot of people do not know what the true definition of being revolutionary or revolutionary is. And Jameer, you stated, pastors, people get assassinated for doing revolutionary things. If he were, just going along with the status quo, then he'd be, here today with us possibly and not being discussed in this way. So I agree, for all the critiques, again, looking at the humanity of a person. And from the beginning, when we talked about being able to, understanding that you're not going to make it through the decade as you move forward in the fight for liberation. And he made a lot of statements that we don't hear in his speeches and, when he spoke that would be considered incendiary and definitely revolutionary. And we don't hear, those are the sound bites that we don't hear over and over again. So I guess the very last thing, and I know we're coming up, on the end right here. The very last thing I want to speak to is, he got killed for a reason. He was murdered. He was assassinated because his ideals were pushing the status quo, because it was revolutionary and it was making people uncomfortable. And it was threatening. It was threatening the status quo. So we as individuals in the year 2021, looking at the King legacy, how can we use that to ignite our personal and collective efforts, like the full understanding of Dr. King, not the linear one, not the I have a dream one, or not looking at him as just being a pacifist, but the totality of Dr. King, the humanity of it all, the bravery of it all, the mistakes that were made, the things that, we do again if we had the opportunity, all of that, his legacy. How is that important now? Joseph?
His legacy is still important now because we're still in this fight. I believe it's not over yet. We still deal with things like systemic racism, social racism, environmental racism, concentrated poverty, and just all sorts of societal issues that I can't even just begin to even scratch the surface of. There's no way that I can list them all. And the fact that there's still such a comprehensive list of things that we have to change within the society, and not only just in this American civilization, but within the context of this global society that we have built here, that it is still, that Dr. King's legacy is still important. And as long as that continues to exist, then his legacy is going to continue to be important. Even if it didn't, even if there was no fight to be had, it would still be important. But because the fight is still going on, his legacy is going to be everlastingly still here, still within all of us, still very important to all of us. So.
Definitely. And we have Dr. Wilder back. Let's see how you're sounding now.
How do I sound?
Perfect.
Thank y'all for your patience. It's been interesting.
It's fine. It happens. Look, you even look more. It's more clear now.
Okay.
Everything's great. So the question that I asked
had to change computers.
Yes. Trust. We know this struggle. So, but the relevance of Dr. King now, his legacy, looking at the totality of King, why is that important? Why is that important right now? Like, we are honoring there's a national holiday, and as we all have stated, it's been co-opted in a lot of ways. It's been sanitized. The reason why they killed him and then they turned around and made him out to be we've talked about this all night. So considering, as we've unpacked the totality of Dr. King, why, from our perspective as people, as Black people who are actively pushing for Black liberation, why is the Dr. King legacy important?
Definitely because the work is not finished. We still have issues of poverty. We still have police brutality. We still have inequitable access to health care. We just have many issues with which he engaged that has not been finished. And I think that's the failure of how he is characterized as an icon. And in reality, he wasn't. He was a man who, as many of you shared tonight, who was first and foremost one who recognized a call from God to not only redeem the soul of America, but in the redemption of that soul, to empower people to move toward their greatest potential and highest good, and even to the point where he realized that it came at a price. But the calling, the movement were a lot bigger than him, and that's what he followed. What the call that was on his life, and that call was to service. That call was to sacrifice, but in that it was a call to love. So when he adopted the concept of beloved community, it was not only just being concerned about folks going to heaven. It was about creating heaven on earth. That's what Jesus did. Jesus was a model for him. The prophets in the Old Testament who spoke truth to power, who knew that God called them. That was Dr. King. And definitely understanding that each of us have the ability to serve. I mean, Dr. King said it before. You don't have to have your subjects and verbs to agree. You don't have to have a degree behind your name to serve. Just be available to serve. And so I think that Dr. King's legacy is still relevant today because one, the work is unfinished. Two, the work is big enough so that everyone can play a part. And then three, the next generations are let me rephrase that. And the third part is that the next we have a call to ensure that what the next generations do is to carry the torch and continue toward the goal of justice, equity, and equality. And so we want to make sure that the work we do now, it won't be as arduous, it won't be as difficult as the work that we're doing right now. And to the churches, it's important that churches reflect on their belief system and what that belief system moves them to do. For Dr. King, that meant not only having a private relationship with God, but also being a public disciple. And that's what it means. That's what he epitomized when he was demonstrating what it meant to be a Christian. So we are not to just have our own relationship with God in private, but we are public disciples who are called to a work greater than ourselves. And so that's why it's important for us to think about and wrestle with the relevance of Dr. King's work and what it means for us now today.
Definitely. And last Rodney, we're definitely up on our time. So but if you want to, answer that, and then we're gonna announce who our winners are. And so yeah, Rodney.
Yeah, I would just say that we need to. It's like anything with our spiritual principles or our different guideposts or sayings that may get passed down from generation to generation. We have to deal with them in the context of the times that we're in today and know how to apply them today and not always see things through the lens of yesterday. So one of the things that I think we have to be mindful of, we've allowed this political discussion to get boiled down to red and blue and Democrat and Republican and left and right. I think we have to rise above that. There's systemic racism on both sides. And so we have to be willing to, like Dr. King, call out the principle and challenge those individuals, no matter what party they represent or what their church affiliation is, or religious affiliation is. We have to find that courage and that assessment and analysis as we deal with issues today. And then I will also say that as we are seeing a public resurgence right now of white supremacy and violence, I think it's going to call upon us to bring forward our level of experience and depth and understanding to once again to try to make sure that the burning house doesn't burn down with us in it. And so I see that there's some lessons that we can learn from Dr. King and many others. All of our brilliant heroes and sheroes that we can bring forward today. Because unlike in 1950s and the 1960s, where information may have been limited, we have all kinds of information at our fingertips. We have all kinds of access at our fingertips. So just as we're up here today from all across the country, communicating with people all across the world, we're in a position of Dr. King have had access to, that we have access to today. So I think we should consider those tools at our disposal in order to make that next generation even stronger than we are as we continue to progress.
Well said, well said. So, look, one of us has an early flight in the morning, and so I don't want to. We definitely got to start wrapping things up. But we want to thank everybody who is tuned in tonight, who tuned in with us. It's been a great discussion. Again, to the point, everybody tapped into the fact that Dr. King was revolutionary and that his ideas were radical. And I think as we celebrate, the acts of service are definitely important in all of the things that we do, the breakfast, the luncheons, all of these things. But nonetheless, let's tap into that revolutionary side of him, that side that went against the grain, the side that was a rabble rouser, the side that, where he did things that were uncomfortable. That's the part to me that really honors Dr. King's legacy, being able to step into discomfort and being able to do the things that are just not always safe and formulaic. He went down a path that cost him his life. And even if you are not ready to give your life, being ready to give a level of discomfort to push towards Black liberation, and understand that that's what he was pushing towards. It was not, just for pomp and circumstance. So I think it's important that we remember that as we celebrate. So do something, speak out in a way in which you've never spoken out before, read text that you have never read before, speak truth to power in ways that make you uncomfortable, align with people who maybe you thought, I don't know, that's a little, step out of your comfort zone. To me, that's a great way to honor Dr. King and not just do the things that we normally do. All right. And so with that, I'm going to announce the winners real quickly. Our first one was I had the question of name the last speech of Dr. King. And our first one was Miss Lakeisha Owens. She said, I've been to the mountaintop. So this is your book right here, Why We Can't Wait. We will reach out to you to get your address and make sure that you receive this book. Thank you for participating and tuning in. Our second one was the year the letter from the Birmingham jail was written. And the answer was 1963. And the first one was Miss Letitia Nichols. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll get your information. So this one here, The Radical King, this one is yours. Thank you for participating and tuning in. And then finally, the last one was what church did Dr. King pastor during the Montgomery bus boycott? And that one went to Miss Patricia Starks. And she said the Dexter Avenue Memorial Baptist Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. That's a mouthful right there. But this one is yours. So thank you for participating and tuning in. And everybody, thank you all for tuning in. And we know when it comes to liberation, it's not a thing that happens on one day. It's not a holiday. It's a constant thing. So again, step out of that comfort zone. Again, if you are a Dr. King enthusiast, I think that would be the way that would make him feel the best if he were able to view what's going on here. I think that would move him the most, for us to get uncomfortable in the movement towards Black liberation. And with that said, you guys make sure that you continue. Oh, and I want to thank all of our guests here. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilder. This is the first time that you have been here with us, and it was a pleasure. I want to let you know that you are now an official member of our literacy gang. Although we did not, and I think literacy is always relevant with Clever Communities in Action, because we are giving away books tonight, but we have a whole literacy gang here. And now you are a part of this gang. You cannot get out of this gang. What this means is that you are going to get all of this love from this virtual village community, and you can't escape it. And you are welcome here anytime. So everybody, let's welcome Dr. Wilder to our literacy gang. Gang, gang, BB, all right? And to Jameer, to Joseph, and Rodney, all the time working with you all. It is a pleasure. Rodney and I will be back on February 1st with the Virtual Village show. So those of you all who have been tuning in from the very first day of the school closures, we are back with our 4th season. So make sure that you tune into that. And if you are interested in advertising with Clever Communities in Action, make sure that you reach out to us at admin@clevercommunities.org. And if you are interested in learning more about us or making donations, you can visit clevercommunities.org. So thank you so much. We love you all. And we are going to take you out with the commercial for season 4. So check it out. It's going to be exciting. Jamir, give it to him.
The Virtual Village Show is back with season 4, starting February 1st, every Monday through Wednesday. The Virtual Village is ready to inspire all ages. Our industry-leading teachers are here to reinforce foundational literacy skills, provide culturally affirming literature, and we have exciting Black History facts for the entire family. Log on today at clevercommunities.org or visit our social media pages.